Hey, wake up. It's Means Morning News. Just after 11 a.m. on the East Coast, I'm the newsman, Sam Sachs. Good morning to everyone, especially the Gallagher brothers, who thrilled Oasis fans this week with news that the band is getting back together and going on tour. Wow, that is huge. Wait. I'm receiving word that the Gallagher brothers have gotten in a fight and the band is breaking up again. Oh, well. Israel just expanded its war against the Palestinian people by carrying out a major military operation in the West Bank. Now, West Bank raids have been routinely executed since last October, but this week it escalated dramatically, with hundreds of Israeli soldiers backed by tanks and trucks and supported by airstrikes, assaulting the occupied territories, killing 9 people, rounding up others, and displacing Palestinian civilians. The West Bank is not controlled by Hamas, but instead the more moderate Palestinian Authority, which had nothing to do with planning or carrying out the October 7th uprising. Israeli attacks there prove that this campaign goes beyond Gaza and is aimed at ethnically cleansing Palestinians wherever they live. So far, more than 650 Palestinians in the West Bank have been killed by Israeli forces over the last 10 months. Israel's foreign minister, Israel Katz, said on Twitter that there was no distinction between Gaza and the West Bank. Quote, "We must deal with the threat just as we deal with the terrorist infrastructure in Gaza, including the temporary evacuation of Palestinian residents and whatever steps might be required. This is a war in every respect, and we must win it." Ongoing settlement building in the West Bank has already been deemed by the UN's International Court of Justice to be violating the Geneva Convention through illegal annexation and forced displacement of populations. The court urged nations to not provide material support to the ongoing international crime. But this week, the Israeli Defense Ministry acknowledged how crucial the United States has been to its war effort. It confirmed that since its latest war on Palestinians started last October, the U.S. has provided a staggering 50,000 tons of bombs and military equipment that has been, quote, crucial for sustaining the IDF's operational capabilities during the ongoing war. Remember that next time Joe Biden or Kamala Harris claim that they're doing everything to secure a ceasefire in Gaza. The president of Mexico, Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, aka AMLO, just told the U.S. to mind its own damn business and paused embassy relations with Washington in a row over judicial reforms. AMLO is overhauling the Mexican court system in an effort to root out corruption. The major change is submitting all of the nation's judges to popular elections, where they are voted in or out of office. Currently, judges in Mexico are appointed. AMLO has been waging war against the Mexican judiciary, which has stymied many of his leftist reforms to the state. Foreign investors, however, are concerned that under the proposed reforms, that judicial bulwark protecting capital will be dismantled, which is what's driving a lot of the criticism of AMLO stateside. Last week, U.S. Ambassador to Mexico Ken Salazar issued a memo criticizing the judicial reforms. He claimed, quote, "I believe popular direct election of judges is a major risk to the functioning of Mexico's democracy." Wait, what? How is subjecting judges to democratic elections a major risk to democracy? I think it's the opposite, actually. Ken, buddy, maybe sit this one out since you're living in the US where a Supreme Court of unelected judges serve for life and are currently running roughshod over democracy. Canada's ambassador to Mexico, Graham Clark, also spoke out against the reforms and claimed that investors were concerned. AMLO responded by pausing embassy relations with Canada, too. A bipartisan group of U.S. senators, Jim Risch, Ben Cardin, Marco Rubio, and Tim Kaine, also spoke out against Mexico's judicial changes, as did a group of lobbyists for multinational corporations. In remarks this week, AMLO called comments from critics outside Mexico reckless. He added, referring to the U.S. and Canada, quote, "They have to learn to respect Mexico's sovereignty because we are not going to give them advice there, nor to say that it is okay and what is wrong. We want them to be respectful. There is a reciprocal relationship in terms of sovereignty." Well, if I may quote a famous carpenter from 2,000 years ago, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for the United States to not meddle in the affairs of other countries to protect foreign capital. Look it up, it's in the Bible. Left-wing political leaders in France are calling for street protests against President Emmanuel Macron, who appears set on toppling the Fifth Republic. Let's just recap what's happening here in France. Macron's centrists were in power in parliament, but believing that he can show his political strength against the far right, Macron called for snap elections to consolidate centrist control. Now, this was a stupid idea because his centrists just got dominated by the far right in European parliamentary elections. But Macron moved ahead anyway, and in those elections held in July, his political coalition faceplanted, coming in third place behind the fascists who came in second, thankfully because a leftist coalition of communists, socialists, and Greens under the banner of a new popular front saved the day and came in first, winning the most votes. Now, it's at this point that Macron, who has a separate mandate and will be in office until 2027 no matter what, has a choice to make. He can respect the will of the voters and bend the knee to the left, which got the most votes, or at least more votes than any other coalition, or he can bend the knee to the far right and form a coalition with the freaks and Nazis over there. There's also this third option, one preferred by liberals who don't want to be perceived as aligning with fascists. Macron could just deny the left power at all costs, create political instability for months or years that ultimately benefits the far right. Yeah, he chose the third option there. The new Popular Front submitted its nominee to be prime minister this week, a necessary requirement to form the new government. And Macron just ignored it. He finally claimed that he won't appoint a prime minister who can't survive an immediate no confidence vote. Well, sorry to quote lib politicians in the US, but he's electable if you'll vote for him. Instead, Macron is admitting his centrists would immediately just join fascists to topple a leftist government if he appoints the new Popular Front's choice. Macron, for now, is keeping in place the centrist caretaker government that he formed after the elections to manage affairs until a new governing coalition is formed, which can't get to work until Macron seats the dang prime minister, which he's not doing. Macron has spent more than a month meeting with centrists and those on the, let's say, centrist periphery, mostly on the right side, in order to cobble together a different majority to keep power in parliament. He even this week met with one of the leaders of the far right, Marine Le Pen. So far, Macron doesn't have the majority he needs, though. Last month, Macron hid behind the upcoming Olympics in France to delay conceding power. This is from the Associated Press. Macron told the France 2 network that the current government, who resigned last week to take on a purely caretaker role, would handle current affairs during the Olympics, which are being staged in Paris. Macron added, quote, "Until mid-August, we're not in a position to be able to change things because it would prompt disorder. I have chosen the stability." Okay, well, it's now August 28th, well beyond mid-August. Although the Paralympics are starting today, so I suppose Macron could use that as an excuse to keep his technocratic centrist government in power even longer. Macron's caretaker government has now been in power 43 days. That's the longest of any caretaker reign in the entirety of France's fifth or fourth republics, going back to 1946. The heads of leftist political parties have described what's happening as a coup and called for mass protests in September. Two astronauts stuck aboard the International Space Station will not return home until February 2025 at the earliest, and they won't be flying back on the same craft that took them to space, a now malfunctioning Boeing Starliner. That's the latest decision from NASA, which had spent months trying to test and diagnose the problems with Starliner's thruster systems before clearing astronauts Sunita Williams and Butch Wilmore to return to Earth on the ship. Over the weekend, though, the space agency finally concluded that there's just too much risk to fly Starliner back to Earth with humans aboard. And so Williams and Wilmore will instead hitch a ride back on a SpaceX Dragon capsule, turning what was supposed to be an 8-day mission into one that's likely to last more than 9 months. The main concern was that the same thruster issues that caused problems docking Starliner to the International Space Station could malfunction during re-entry, potentially causing the vehicle to burn up. NASA Administrator Bill Nelson acknowledged that prior deadly space accidents, the Challenger and Columbia, weighed heavily on the decision to not fly Williams and Wilmore home aboard Starliner. In both those two prior cases, engineers warned that problems could pose a risk to the crew, but were overruled. Challenger then blew up on launch. Columbia blew up during re-entry. In this case, though, precaution appears to have prevailed. NASA will instead try to fly Starliner back to Earth remotely sometime in September. As for what this means for the future of Boeing and manned spaceflight, it's likely to have no effect at all. Space agency paid Boeing $4.2 billion to develop Starliner, and the ship bricked on its first flight. But Administrator Nelson stressed that he believes 100% that another manned Boeing Starliner mission will launch again in the future once the root causes for the problem have been identified and fixed. Meanwhile, back on Earth, another Boeing airplane is behind the deaths of 2 people. This week, 2 Delta workers were killed when a tire on a Boeing jet exploded while they were trying to change it. Airplane tire blowouts can be extremely dangerous, carrying the force of dynamite. The 3rd worker suffered major injuries. The FAA announced an investigation into the incident. The Boeing body count continues to grow. All right, friends, the show ends this morning with a sunrise from Puerto Rico. It was sent in by Dom, Liz, and Dan in Vieques. Enjoy. Thanks, Dom. Thanks, Liz. And thanks, Dan. Show's over. Thanks for watching. And thanks to the team behind the scenes. Please sign up for Means TV, subscribe to our YouTube and podcast channels, and follow us on social media. One day, capitalism will fall. Until then, we're going to be right here. See you tomorrow.